Hello and welcome back to the Global Mindfulness and Education Summit. I'm one of your hosts, Dr. Chris Willard. I'm sitting here in Cambridge, Massachusetts on Zoom with Lucy Draper-Clarke, who is in South Africa, pretty far away from where I am. And I'm so excited to get to know you a bit, Lucy, and hear a little bit more about your work. So welcome and thank you.
Thank you, Chris. It's wonderful to be back with your community.
Yeah. And this global community, just COVID has been such a challenge, but I feel like also globally, in some ways, we've done more connecting, even if we certainly have not been in person as much as we'd like to be in these past 20-something months that it's been. So, Lucy, I was just hoping we could start, if you just want to share a little bit, like for yourself, what was your journey into mindfulness or into some of these practices? How did these get started for you?
Well, I was a deputy principal at a school in Botswana, and as all administrators and school teachers know, education is a challenging place. And so I realized that probably the best service I could do to everyone I worked with, but also to myself, was to learn mindfulness and become more present and as compassionate as possible. And what I found was the compassion teachings in particular gave me a certain amount of clarity, so that, I could always put at the forefront of any decisions what would most serve the children that we were all there to serve.
Yeah. And how did you get started in education? What brought you into education? Just something that had always been interesting to you or in your family, or how did you become a teacher, an educator, an administrator?
Interesting. That seems so far away. But after university, I just did some tutoring, and then I thought it was wonderful, and it seemed to kind of play into my strengths of really loving to always learn and loving to be in relationship with others. And I found teenagers so inspiring because of the full spectrum of kind of emotions that they offer within a classroom. So it was that kind of balance of challenge and fun and the place for lifelong learning. So I actually did my teacher training when I was still living in the UK. And then after a few years in London, I moved out to work in Botswana. And that's where over time I became a deputy principal in a big school there called Maruapula. And then when my yearning for learning sort of took over again, I left Botswana and came down to South Africa to do a PhD at University of the Witwatersrand. And that's where I'm still now as a supervisor and sometimes a lecturer and a researcher. Yeah.
So you've taught in a lot of places across a lot of different cultures, or learned in one culture, moved to a few different ones. Would you mind sharing a little bit about what that's been like, learning how to teach most effectively across cultures, and what's worked, what hasn't worked, whether it's teaching mindfulness or really anything?
Well, because I often think I was born in Sri Lanka, so I sort of get a sense that my body kind of came into being in the East. And so I love the Eastern healing practices of yoga and Qigong, and of course the mindfulness through the Buddhist influence. And then I kind of get the sense that my head was educated in the West when I moved back to the UK. But Africa for me is where my heart has had the most education, the real strong sense of relationship in Africa and the practices that communities make use of here to heal trauma and to build community and to keep a sense of hope alive, even, in the face of a great deal of suffering and struggle.
Yeah, which, we certainly know Africa has been through over the centuries, and even, of course, more recently, where you are in South Africa, and even more recently, as you and I are talking, the Omicron variant spreading, and what a challenge that's been in terms of the way kind of the challenges Africa's had in relation to the pandemic in particular. So Yeah, could you share a little bit about some of those, the way that you've integrated perhaps some of those practices from, kind of existing already there in South Africa or other parts of Africa with some of Eastern practices that you also encountered growing up or that feel kind of part of yourself as well, and kind of what's come out of that?
Yeah, I've really felt, mindfulness for me seems to be a foundation. So, really, a foundation of all universal wisdom traditions.
Mm-hmm.
And what I really learned from the Eastern traditions was how to sit in silence and solitude and stillness. And yet, at times of trauma and crisis, that didn't feel like the most helpful of practices. So what we started exploring with our students and in my own personal life as well is how to use the healing arts. And you may be familiar with the Gabrielle Roth quotation of, if you go to a shaman with sickness, they ask you, when did you last sing? When did you last dance? When did you last enter the sweet territory of silence? And when did you last listen to stories?
Wow.
And so the research we've been doing recently with our students has been on this healing arts pedagogy and inviting everyone to participate in these ancient practices, which really help us balance our nervous system. So I'm sure many people listening are familiar with Dan Siegel's model of the window of tolerance and how we tend to go into hyperarousal, that fight and flight state when there's danger about, but also when we feel that we can't respond to danger, when there's a sense of hopelessness or overwhelm, then we go actually right down into our hypoarousal.
Right.
And that's what we started noticing with our students, because the department I work in, Drama for Life, works with arts activists. So we're used to very energetic students who want to be out there transforming the world. And suddenly during COVID, we noticed that our students were actually going into that hypoarousal state, a sense of depression and overwhelm and that inability to get up and get moving, and, that trust that if enough of us pull together, we can change the world. And of course, South Africa has been an incredible model of activism that has transformed inhumane systems of government or oppression. So to see our students kind of losing that hope was really poignant. Which is why we're starting this whole program on healing arts pedagogy. So bringing back into our communities the willingness to sing, to dance, to tell stories. And, this has been within Africa, obviously, for generations, but it also feels like the West or the North could benefit from these. Mindfulness as a still practice has been offered, but really the quickest way to still your mind is to move your body. So yeah, that's what we've been noticing, how to rebalance. And then, when our nervous system is in balance, we become more kind, we become more connected, and we also think better. So for tertiary level students, that's absolutely imperative. We need to bring our prefrontal cortex online rather than be operating from our hind brain.
Right. Absolutely. Can you share a little bit about the program, how it's developed, kind of some of the practices that you're sharing with young people and in the program and the curriculum where you're doing this?
So, in my personal work, I tend to run retreats. And so I've been offering those different types of practices and giving people some information about their window of tolerance so that they learn how to regulate themselves. So when we feel that we're kind of low energy, don't want to get out of bed, feeling disconnected from others, then invite them to actually put on some music or talk to a friend, even if it's on, over Zoom, for example. Come back into that sense of social engagement, that relationship. But on the other hand, if we're in that fight and flight mode, then use our mindfulness practices, use our compassion practices to down-regulate. So that's the work that I do, for the general public, also for activists,
Incredible.
And I've run some online workshops for activists. And then for our own students, we work with honors and master's students and PhD students as well. What we ran during our annual conference was a morning session where we, over the 4 days, we offered, first of all, I led a morning practice that included silence. So we did a bit of dancing, but then we came into stillness and silence. And then another of our colleagues led a music-based practice. And then we did storytelling on one of the days, and also, a movement embodied practice, so that we could really reconnect the brain and the body. And even if you look at us here on Zoom, we're kind of disconnected. All you can see is our head, a little bit of our torso.
Right.
But it really, this disconnection is so prevalent, I think, globally, even before COVID. So these kind of bringing back the ancient into the modern, I feel is a valuable contribution that we can make. And Africa has all those traditions.
Such a robust cultural history of that. Yeah.
Exactly.
And it is really, I'm struck by, as societies modernize in different places, I really do feel like just there's this increasing, kind of cut off from our bodies. And then, that's been escalating so many places around the world, and then increasingly, of course, as you said, during COVID, like here we all are on Zoom, where it's like we're literally just interacting from the head up and so disembodied, and people joking about showing up to meetings not wearing pants and stuff like that. But it really is like, how do we continue to connect, to resonate with each other, to co-regulate with each other, to co-embody different practices when we're online, in the ways that the pandemic has really impacted that in such unfortunate ways. And I think these practices that are not just, as you say, sitting in stillness, right, but also how do we create these body-based practices and movement and storytelling and these other forms of connection. I think I often think about the way mindfulness and some of these practices came to different parts of the world, and it often was like, oh, it's about stillness. And like, it's not about stillness for stillness's sake, though. It's about stillness so that you can know how to move more effectively. It's about silence so that you can speak more, more truth, and that you can, speak more, effectively. And I think, to come back to that it's not just about silence and stillness for silence and stillness's sake, but that these can also then help us to move and take more skillful actions in the world. And yet that's been hard these past few years. So, yeah. And so what else can you tell me about some of the work that you're doing, or that your organization has been doing? Have you got a curriculum that you're building, or a specific program, or is it really kind of like bringing in leaders to do these retreats and have these kinds of experiences?
So interestingly, before COVID, we won a grant from Mind and Life, a think tank grant. So we brought together traditional healers and drama therapists and dance therapists for a research retreat. So before COVID, we started gathering this data on what we called at that time the African contemplative practices. And we just looked over the period of 3 nights, 4 days together, how facilitating and participating in these different traditional rituals really brought us close together. And the whole point of the Mind and Life think tank grants is that you bring different, very interdisciplinary participants. So we had a Buddhist monk, we had a neuroscientist, we had 2 traditional healers, one who is a Sanusi, so a wisdom keeper, another who's a Sangoma, so she's a healer, and then we had a drummer and a storyteller who led a practice here, it's known as Insomi, and then a drama therapist who led an Ungidi practice, which is a stamping ritual. So we gathered all this data, and there is a video available on that. But now we're at the stage of publishing some journal articles about it. So this was information we gathered before COVID. And now that we have that accessible, we are applying for grants so that we can really do more research on what we're calling this healing arts pedagogy, or HAPPY, HAPPY. And seeing whether we can now take this into schools, because South Africa, sadly, has some of the lowest educational outcomes, despite having a reasonable amount of money put into education itself. But I think because of our history, there's so much intergenerational trauma and violence that is prevalent within the society. Right. So we want to develop a curriculum based on some traditional cultural practices so that they feel relevant for the participants. And also looking at, cutting edge neuroscience work and the field of mindfulness that has really been a big player in that regard. And then take that into schools, because Drama for Life already has a relationship with many schools in some of the most distressed communities. So we want to link artists and art therapists and offer the curriculum so that teachers also can present it. And they're simple rhythmic practices which just really help to downregulate the nervous system. But we're waiting for funding, and then we're very excited to get to work.
Yeah. I often think about the research component, and there's so many different kinds of embodied practices out there, mindfulness being just one of them. And there's, as you said, there's such incredible, robust research on mindfulness and neuroscience and the nervous system and all of that. And yet, and then people often ask me, like, well, is drumming mindfulness, is dance mindfulness? And I feel like, it's not exactly, although we can do these things mindfully, but these are embodied practices. And they probably, if we took them into the laboratory, if we did some research on them, we'd probably find that they're just as good as mindfulness. It's just that mindfulness happens to have gotten a lot of attention, a lot of funding, and therefore a lot of research. But if we start to actually take some of this research money and apply it toward these other embodied practices, I can't imagine we wouldn't see incredible healing results as well. And in fact, especially with these practices that are integrated with local cultures, right, that people are co-creating, new practices, or allowing them to evolve, right, or finding these different ways of re-practicing some of these practices that already exist within cultures, that they'll find the same incredible results that mindfulness has found when you stick it under a microscope or into an MRI or do this other research on it. So it's really exciting to hear that that's a lot of what you're doing. And I certainly hope you get that funding, because I think it's so important to just give all humans so many different avenues to healing and so many different avenues to, whatever your definition of enlightenment might be, but, some kind of peace, of course, really coming from it. And so, I certainly hope it comes through, and I look forward to hearing what happens there.
Yeah. Well, we're hoping the same thing. And I mean, I guess the challenge is that the embodied practices, there's so many different aspects of them. Even if you're doing research on yoga, it's like it includes intention, it includes breath, it includes movement. So the kind of Western model of science, which is reductive in nature, has found it difficult to measure. But if we give equal value to qualitative research, and if we give equal value to creative research, basically, if you feel better after doing something, that's all you need to know, whether your blood pressure's gone down or your
research enough.
I often laugh that, Western science is basically just catching up with these traditions that have been going for thousands of years. And people know that they feel better, they feel more connected, they feel a greater sense of joy and, peacefulness when they move, or when they sit in a silent, quiet, or a silent and connected place. Because of course the advantage of stillness is that sense of connection with all beings. Whereas when we're moving, the feeling of connection is much more with those who are in our immediate environment.
Yeah. Right.
So I think there's value in all of these different things. But yeah, for building community, particularly as we come out of this pandemic, if we move together, if we dance together, if we do yoga together, then we will, reconnect us. And I understand, trauma leaves the body much more quickly when our social engagement network is brought online, where we see each other's eyes, where we, can sense into the body and the heartbeat, and, hugging practices.
Yeah.
Thich Nhat Hanh offers these beautiful ways of hugging and breathing together 3 times. And it's amazing how quickly one downregulates. And then you can come back into your human family.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you couldn't have said it better. I keep thinking, and I've been doing, different online workshops, and now a few more, in-person workshops through this pandemic. And, as it hopefully winds down, we'll see. But really kind of thinking, I think, so much of the world, certainly here in North America where I am, but other parts of the world too, there's so much polarization, right, that people feel. And I think, then spending more time online has only exacerbated that. The way social media operates, right, just exacerbates divisions and polarization. And then I think just not interacting with people, not, like you said, breathing the same air and sensing, in the electromagnetic field, someone else's heartbeat, dancing together, hugging, right? These things that actually do resynchronize us and remind us that I'm human and you're human. And I really hope that these more embodied practices like you're sharing about, and movement and these other things can really help people to reconnect, so that we can come out of this whole thing stronger and more connected, rather than just more polarized, more fragmented, as societies, and also as individuals feeling so fragmented, right? But that we can, heal ourselves, and also heal our communities, and really come together much more stronger as a human family, as you said. So thank you for the work that you're doing, because I really believe that that's going to be an important way pointing us out of the mess that has happened in this pandemic, but also some of the human mess in general that predated it too. So thank you for the work that you're doing.
Well, thank you for bringing all these different voices together in the Global Education Summit. It's such valuable work to hear, and to recognize that this sort of research and this kind of urgency to reconnect as humans is happening all around the world. And I think it gives those of us who feel a bit overwhelmed at times, it gives us, a sense of that bigger family. Yeah,
absolutely.
So thank you, Chris. And thank you to Helen as well, who I spoke to last time I was on the summit.
Absolutely. So if people want to get in touch with you or learn more about your organization, where can folks go?
So my own personal website is just my name, lucydraper-clarke.com. And then the department I'm connected to at WITS is called Drama for Life. So if you Google that, you'll find out all the wonderful research that our students and our lecturers do.
Great. Thank you so much. And I hope as the world opens up, I used to travel a lot. I hope our paths cross and we can do some hugging and dancing and some silence and stillness together at some point. But thank you again for joining us. And thank you for the wonderful work that you're doing. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris. Take care.
Take care.